Greetings world. We are anonymous.
I'm going to add another segment here explaining the Julian Assange situation, because I think there's a few things that I failed to address yesterday that have come up since then that merit being addressed. First thing is that there have been several defenses that have arisen, either from Assange or his defenders in this case, as to why this revelation that Assange contacted Donald Trump Jr. during the election and exchanged information with him and offered strategy and advice regarding the election, including the idea that they should challenge the results if they lost, as well as offering information about an anti-Trump think tank and offering a password to that think tank, and proposing that the Trump people give WikiLeaks tax returns that they could release, apparently, presumably in a dishonest way, since there would be no reason for WikiLeaks to run it and say, "Oh, Trump gave us these to publish." That don't really make any sense. It would presumably be a dishonest leak, whereby they're pretending to have gotten this to the normal channels, and we don't have to speculate as to why they would do that, because Assange himself in these messages explains why, among the several reasons that would be good for Trump and Trump's campaign that he's trying to help, and it would be good for WikiLeaks, is that it would help to nullify the quote perception unquote that Assange is pro-Trump and pro-Russia. As I've noted, it's very ironic that he would take issue with the allegation that he's pro-Trump in a conversation with Donald Trump Jr. in which he's offering him advice, information, and proposing strategies for their mutual benefit. So there's been a number of defenses of all that, very few of which have actually dealt with the specifics or dealt with the actual problems of this, and most of which have either involved A, this is a deep state operation, B, it's just communications. Communications is not a problem. That's what media outlets do. C, we all knew that Assange had been in touch with Donald Trump Jr. because he had tweeted about it after the election several months later, when he told us that he had told him to release these emails, and that he did, et cetera, et cetera. Number one is that we don't attribute things to the deep state or to the intelligence community unless we actually have evidence that those things came from the deep state or intelligence community, or some overriding reason in the absence of evidence to believe that. In this case, what very surely happened is that there are anti-WikiLeaks segments of the government, including this existing government. Sometimes they forget that the Trump people and his CIA agent have continued to call for his arrest, and are still keeping him locked up in that embassy. So we can't quite pretend that the Hillary Clinton people were the only ones who did that. In this case, certainly it was leaked for a purpose, and the purpose was to harm WikiLeaks. That's fairly undeniable. The Atlantic can't be faulted for running it because it's newsworthy. Same reason that WikiLeaks can't be faulted for running DNC emails, because it's newsworthy. They can be faulted for an interpretation they put on it as incorrect. In this case, I don't see any incorrect interpretation of the Atlantic article. The second broad argument that they were just communicating, I think is plain nonsense, and anyone who looks at the actual exchanges and wants to call that just communicating, that's great. That would never hold up in any reasonable interpretation. You can say that Hitler and Stalin were just communicating when they divided Poland. You can say that the CIA were just communicating when they put out black ops propaganda in foreign countries to interfere with their elections. You can say that if you're trying to defend those people without actually discussing what they did. And that's what's being done here. C, the fact that the idea that we knew Assange had talked to Donald Trump Jr., that's absolutely true. And so the headline at the Atlantic, like most headlines, would not have been written by the actual author, If you go by what the headline says, it's certainly not news. But we're not talking about the headline of the article. We're talking about the actual contents of the article, which is that they had extended communications during the election. Whereas, in fact, WikiLeaks had claimed previously, in November 2016, that they did not collaborate with the Trump campaign. And here they had. The idea of the term collaborate, the actual term that's being used mostly in both this and the Russia situation, to collude. We've seen that word be denounced and attacked as not really a real word. That's a new development here. It really doesn't mean anything. What is collusion? Collusion obviously actually does have specific definitions, and of the ones you can look up in the dictionary. This kind of collaboration between Trump Jr. and Assange would constitute collusion, not under a legal sense, but under an actual dictionary English sense that most people have been using it. The final arguments in defense of Assange, or something, is that we shouldn't be criticizing him for these things, and that I in particular shouldn't be criticizing him. Not because what he did was okay, but because Assange has done so much, which he has. Specifically, Kim.com tweeted at me last night, and then we've had some communications in private, which I won't go into here because they were in private. But the gist of the tweet was that because Assange had defended me, he had published stuff about my case and written about it and supported me, that it was somehow amiss or remiss, or whichever one that would be, for me to take issue with anything he does. That was the implication. He doesn't say it outright. And that has been repeated by a number of some other supporters of Assange, who used to be supposedly my supporters as well, but are now upset. I should note, without getting into a big catfight here, that I went to prison and was investigated from the very beginning because of my support for WikiLeaks, my defense of WikiLeaks, which extended from early 2010 to middle of 2012, when I was finally arrested, and which involved operations to identify and punish members of the government and members of private companies that have been exposed by anonymous hackers of my acquaintance via email hacks as having conspired to go after Assange, and to go after WikiLeaks, and to go after Glenn Greenwald, and to go after WikiLeaks' financial contributors. And those are the subjects that were listed on my search warrant. And even the sort of pseudo case that they later came up with regarding Stratfor, which was not listed on my search warrant, but for which I was actually charged, also involved a operation that ended up giving WikiLeaks lots of emails to go up through and do their thing with. So the idea that I was a little lost kitten, and Julian Assange picked me out of the gutter and raised me, and I bit him in the hand, is nonsense. Now, Assange doesn't owe me anything. It's his organization. I've never been a part of WikiLeaks as such. I've defended it from the sidelines and written about it a lot, and helped to ensure that they got information when there was some question of whether that information would go to them in the case of Stratfor, and have done as much as I can to ensure that these people who get exposed after having illicitly pursued WikiLeaks have some consequences, so that as to deter that from happening further. Assange doesn't owe me anything for that, and I don't owe anything to Assange for that. Normally, this is not an argument I would have to feel the need to bring up personally, if it was only being put out by just random Twitter people. But the fact that Kim.com has elected to resort to that argument, I feel required a clarification as to what my obligations are and what they are not to an organization that I went to prison to defend. I do appreciate everything Assange did to bring it to my case, and that's great. And I hope he appreciates the things that I did and the risks I exposed myself to in order to defend not just him, but also the people who had the anonymous PayPal people who had conducted an operation against MasterCard and Visa to bring attention to their illegal economic blockade on WikiLeaks, people who I helped to provide attorneys immediately afterwards, and for which I was also targeted, apparently, by MP Gary and other actors, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of backstory here, and I think that's enough to get into. I don't think I've glossed over any other defenses. Suffice to say that an organization or a movement can start out with a noble purpose and then eventually, over time, start making compromises with those principles and with other principles and get to a point where it demands allegiance, even from people who don't necessarily owe it allegiance. And it can get to the point where they demand that people sacrifice their principles in support of some secretive long-term plan that we don't get to hear about until they're exposed by email leaks. That kind of thing has happened throughout history in different ways with movements and parties, including the Democratic Party. And we don't want to become that. And the best way to avoid that is to allow reasonable criticism and questions, particularly from people who have done their fair share to protect this movement and move it forward. So if you're sad about me taking issue with Julian Assange on this, or a couple weeks ago when he claimed that Trump had been vindicated in his claim that Obama had wiretapped him and falsely said that the CNN article had said that when it in fact it said the exact opposite. If you're unhappy about that, I'm sad. But in any movement, there's always a core or potential core of supporters who are worth having, and then there's always a sort of a swarm surrounding that joins from time to time, depending on whether that movement is seen to be convenient towards its other ideological ends or its partisan prospects, etc. And those people we can do without. So, again, I wish everyone well. Keep on trucking. Thank you very much.